Greetings, Ron Smalek here, and this is another episode in my Let's Talk series. I'm going to be talking about my history with a game or with a property called Pokemon. Now, you may see me playing some game in the background of this video. I don't know what it is because I'm just recording the audio only. I actually tried to record this while playing the Pokemon TCG Online, and I was too busy looking at the moves to concentrate on what I was saying, so I kept losing my place, thought it would be distracting. So I don't know if I'm going to have a Pokemon game or Minecraft or something else under this video, so consider it a vlog where you are just listening to me talk, and the background is just in case you happen to be looking at your screen. So I'm going to be covering my history with the phenomenon called Pokemon. I was going to wait for Pokemon Sun and Moon to come out this November, talk about this topic, because I'm so looking forward to another generation of characters. But I have been surprisingly enthusiastic about Pokemon Go. It has been pretty amazing to see people, adults and kids, walking and biking around my neighborhood and nearby neighborhoods, seeing full-grown men like myself walking through the airport on airport shuttles, all playing Pokemon Go, catching Pokemon in the real world through augmented reality in their everyday lives, and just the overall overwhelming popularity of that app has been quite amazing. So I said, you know what? Okay, maybe now is the time to talk about my history of Pokemon. And this is going to be focused on my personal history, why I like things, what I experienced, what memories stick out to me, and how Pokemon really helped me connect with and stay connected with my kids through their preteen years. And this applies to both of my boys, David and Matt, as you will hear. So I have been playing Pokemon and loving Pokemon for almost 20 years. Other than Star Wars, I would say it's probably like the number 2 property that I care about. And not everybody understands Pokemon. I'm not going to try to convince you if you don't like Pokemon, but you may still enjoy these stories, whether you do or not. So all the way back in 1998, August of 98, in fact, I was around 24, 25 years old. And my son, David, was about 11 years old at that time, if I did the math right. And he had just started a new year in school. I want to say he was a 7th grader, might have been 6th. I don't remember exactly how years map to years in school, how ages map to years in school. But he was somewhere around 6th or 7th grade, and he he had these. He was a very creative kid, still is. And he had this wax where you would take wax of all different colors and you would mold it with your fingers, soften it up, and then make it into different shapes. And I guess you could probably make it into candles, but it was more about making little statues. And Dave decided he had heard about this new thing in school from his friends called Pokemon, and he started making little wax figurines, probably like, I don't know, maybe 3 inches tall, something like that, out of wax, colored wax. And he showed them to us, and his mom and I were, we thought they were very cool looking. He did a really nice job. I particularly remember Scyther, which is a green praying mantis-like Pokemon, a fighting Pokemon, if you will. But I didn't think that much of them. I was pretty new to the real adult world of having an adopted son and a wife and a house that I was paying a mortgage on for the first time, and working my butt off and trying to really figure out what I was going to do as an adult instead of being a kid. And I was commuting back and forth from my home in the suburbs to downtown Chicago, which was about an hour or so commute both each way every day. And I was getting my first laptop, so I was just getting into PC gaming, etc. So that kind of sets the stage. I wasn't watching very many kids' cartoons. I was actually playing very few video games. I think at the time, We may have just gotten a Super Nintendo or not too long before this. We only had a handful of games for it. I remember playing a lot of Final Fantasy, and I don't think there was such a thing as an Xbox yet, but I think we might have had a PlayStation 1 because Final Fantasy might have jumped over to that, and so I wasn't using the Nintendo very much. The NES was packed away in boxes under my stairs. My comic book collections and my action figure collections were all packed away. I don't think I was doing much gaming then. I wasn't doing much with minifigures or anything like that at the time. It's pretty much just working and then doing home stuff. I think I might have been playing Dark Forces for the PC. Maybe Quake was probably done. I think I might have been playing Age of Empires or Civilization at this time. But in any case, so there's these wax figures that my son was playing with. It was something he learned about from school. I didn't think too much of it at the time. And then sometime in right at the end of August, beginning of September, it's just a few days later, he came home with an assignment from school. In fact, now that I think about it, I think this was like one of those introduction to your new classmates assignments where you had to do a project, a TV commercial project is what he chose to do. And he wanted to do a TV commercial about his Pokemon waxed figures. He was selling quote unquote Pokemon action figures. This was fake for school. He wasn't actually selling them. And so we had to borrow a video camera and we had to, make some sets in our living room and film some scenes outside where he would make a TV commercial. Now, I didn't know anything about Pokemon at the time. He wrote up the script, and together we kind of figured out, what some of the sets and things would be. And I got a little bit intrigued. I was like, what is this? This is very interesting to me. Some sort of kids, cartoonish thing, or it was going to be a cartoon. We knew the cartoon was coming, but wasn't out yet. That has 150 different characters you can choose from. And that blew my mind because up to this point, all the different role-playing games that you could play, at most they had like a dozen character classes, like a knight, an archer, a mage, a magic user. But 150 character types, what? And each character type had a different element, like fire, water, etc. And that determined like their weaknesses and strengths against each other. I said, this is pretty intriguing. Let me look this up because, at this time too, we were still playing a lot of tabletop role-playing games, and I was, designing my own RPGs still in my head or on paper for my friends, and still coming up with lots of different mechanics. And I've always been really fascinated by concept of like a wheel that's divided up into segments, let's say 12, and different colors are assigned to each segment. And so the segments that are directly opposite on the color wheel are strong or weak against each other as you move in one direction clockwise around. Things that are, things that are adjacent would be, strong to the right, weak to the left, and things directly across would be nullifying or neutral to each other. So those types of concepts in games. And Pokemon had this extended thing. So at that time, the internet was pretty new. I mean, I was using the internet through Yahoo. I had my daily set of web pages that I would read through to get my geekdom news. And I probably, uploaded and downloaded custom content for Civilization at this time. But internet was not very sophisticated. So Pokemon was one of the first things I really researched on the internet, is my point. And I was just absolutely fascinated by the fact that there was these 151 characters, and there were these additional Pokemon, who you didn't know much about them. You saw glimpses of them, but they weren't in the official list, at the time. And there's this little air of mystery about it, the elemental types. And I created a Word document from scratch where I individually downloaded all 150 Pokemon pictures into this document and copy and pasted their name and their type and I arranged it so that it would print out in probably like a dozen pages, and printed it out for my son, which was really for myself. Just like, hey, here's a catalog of all the possible Pokemon you can get. And he loved it. He thought it was completely awesome. And at the time, my wife was, for her work, was doing a lot of different mailings and different presentations and brochures. So we had this paper, which was basically stickers. And it was a full, 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. You print on it, and then you can cut it out and make stickers. And so we made some Pokemon stickers, and it was really, we were really getting into it. But it was all spawned off of him having to make a TV commercial for work. And we spent the next 2 days just filming and coming up with, refining his storyline and making this amazing TV commercial. And at that time, they started airing ads for the Pokemon the Pokemon cartoon on TV. And so we start, September 5th, I believe, was the first air date in the US, and we watched it, and we had our VCR set up, and we recorded it onto a tape. And I think at that time, when we did this project, there was only I think there was only 2 episodes out. So we had 2 episodes on tape. And in between sort of our live action shots that we filmed with the camera, were, drop-ins of the song and the intro from the cartoon. So our special effects. And one of the reasons this was such a big special moment, because we had so much fun doing the filming process, and we had 2 VCRs set up, and you'd hit play on one and record on the other. And we would edit and cut the film back and forth and rearrange the sequences. And this was the first ever video editing that I had done. And we had such a good time. And my brother-in-law actually came over and was helping us out as well. He's a bit younger than me. He's actually right in between my age and David's age. So there was pretty much 3 generations of us, hanging out and doing this together. And we had all this extra footage, and at the time, he and I were both really big into Pearl Jam, and they had recently released a documentary, behind-the-scenes look at how they make their music. So we decided we were going to do a behind-the-scenes making of the Pokemon TV commercial. So we got David's assignment done for school, his Pokemon TV commercial, and you can actually see it on my other YouTube channel, which is Obvious Obscure. I'll put the link in the description. I don't post on the channel anymore, but my old video's out there. So we spent all this time making the video, and then we spent a making of video, and for the next couple weeks, Rob and I actually went around, and Rob's the brother-in-law, and went around and just filmed all kinds of artsy stuff. And we broke down the lyrics to our favorite songs. And we made music videos, and you can see a couple of those on my other YouTube channel as well. And we just got into this period where we were doing a lot of video editing, and really like what we do today for YouTube all started back in 98. I just didn't know it yet. So that was a huge fun and creative time in my life. And because it was sort of centered around this thing called Pokemon, I think that actually really strengthened the fact that we attached ourselves to Pokemon. Now, the cartoon, as I said, came out at the beginning of September. The end of September, the Game Boy game Pokemon Blue and Red came out. And so I got the blue, and I think David got the red. Red was his favorite color, and I like water. And so we started playing the RPG together. And it was right in my sweet spot. It was an RPG. It was, top down, running around like Final Fantasy. I loved the mechanics of collecting. You heard me mention a little bit ago, comic book collection, action figure collection, Nintendo collection. I'm a collector at heart. And again, I may not have known it as well as I do now, but that is what really hooked me, is oh my God, 150 things to collect, a world to run around in, a storyline. I mean, I was hooked from those days. I mean, there was no question about it. So every day on the train to and from work, I would have my Game Boy, and I don't think it was a Game Boy Color. I think it was just a regular Game Boy. I think the Game Boy Color came out with the next version of Pokemon. I can't remember. And I got my favorite character. My highest level character was a Gengar, which is a ghost Pokemon. It's a third stage evolution. If you know Pokemon, you already know that. If you don't, it's not important. But I had got him up to level 71 by grinding, which means by just battling characters over and over and over again and running around the world and fighting and catching and doing all this stuff. And I remember my favorite move was putting the other Pokemon to sleep. And then while they were asleep, there was a chance every turn that they would wake up and be able to attack you back. So you had to do your moves pretty quickly. It was a risky thing to do. But I used to put the Pokemon to sleep, and then I used to use something called Dream Eater, which would only do damage if the other Pokemon was asleep. And it would do quite a lot of damage. I never actually got that Gengar to level 100. 71, maybe 77 was probably the highest I got him. But level 71 Gengar became my first ever real internet login name when I would log into message boards and create avatars for myself. For a very long time, I used level 71 Gengar. So again, Pokemon, attached itself, was at the perfect time and place for this thing called the internet revolution in my life. So then over the next, couple months, we just enjoyed playing the Pokemon game, watching the cartoon. Even though it was childish, I was just completely amazed at how closely those first series of the game, of the anime actually followed the Game Boy or vice versa. I mean, it was pretty unprecedented that a video game was so closely following the story. And the world of Pokemon started taking off. There was all kinds of external promotions and ways for us to go around our real world and collect Pokemon. For example, at Kentucky Fried Chicken, their version of Happy Meals, you could get Pokemon Beanie Babies. There were Pokemon things at McDonald's. There were Pokemon things all over the place. Everybody was jumping on the Pokemon bandwagon. And as I said, Pokemon Go is currently a way you can walk around your real world and catch Pokemon through your phone. Back then, we were able to extend our collecting from something in a small, very limited handheld game to actual toys and promotions. And of course, I would buy as much Pokemon stuff as I could get my hands on, give it to David. That'd be his stuff, but it was, part of my extended collection, if you will. So then in January 1999, the trading card came out in North America. And at that point, I had been aware of Magic the Gathering. I had played it once or twice with a cousin of mine, but I didn't really know that much about it. So we went out immediately. I think we might have even pre-ordered. I'm not sure if we were able to pre-order, but I feel like we reserved a copy of the starter decks and and some boosters, and we went out and we bought the game. And I clearly remember David and I sitting at our dining room table and pulling out the instruction book and having all the cards and doing two things at once. First of all, trying to figure out how to play this game together, and second of all, trying to figure out how we were going to house our card collection. So here we go, another way to collect Pokemon in trading card form. So we bought binders with these plastic slip-in covers, and each page in your binder would hold 9 cards. So you were simultaneously collecting cards to fill up your binder, but also collecting cards to make what are called decks. And if you're not familiar with trading card games, it basically goes like this. You have hundreds of cards to choose from. You pick out 60 cards, we'll say, that you think go well together. So for example, you might make a deck of all cards that are fire type. So that deck will be strong against a deck that has lots of grass type. It'll be weak against water. Just a high level example. And then as you play the game, you are kind of controlling your characters. You're putting them out on the table, and you are doing damage to the other player, and they're doing damage back to you, and your card slowly loses health, and you symbolize this by putting different tokens on your cards. And we really got into it. Like, we went out and went to craft and hobby stores and bought custom wooden blocks, and we used our printer to print out Pokemon symbols and put them on the sides of the cubes, the blocks, like stickers, and we made our own Pokemon dice. And we bought different damage counters, like little glass beads that we could put on Pokemon, and fancy albums to keep our collections in. And for a while, it was just something that my son and I played together against ourselves. We really didn't know anyone outside of us that played. He may have known a couple kids at school that he could, kind of talk about Pokemon with, but it was really a thing where just he and I would bond together, and we had a lot of fun. We tried a lot of creative decks at that point. And then about 9 months later, by October of 1999, everybody was in their Y2K mindset, and meanwhile, he and I, we went to we went to a mall where they had this thing called the Pokemon League, and it was a Mew distribution. And what that means is, in your Game Boy game, you could catch all 150 Pokemon, but there was one legendary Pokemon that you couldn't get through the game. You had to go to a special event. You had to link your Game Boy up to a special computer with this thing called a link cable, and they would transfer this Mew, this 151st Pokemon, into your game. And we were ecstatic. Like, this was the craziest thing we had ever heard. It was also promotion of the first Pokemon movie, which was coming out later in November. And so we went to this thing, and we stood in this long line to get our Mew, and everybody in line is playing with their Game Boy and comparing notes. And then we went over to like this other area where all these people had their Pokemon cards. And, we pulled out our fancy boxes where we carried all of our decks of cards, and we had all of our tradables. And I remember we're just sitting there kind of playing together. We didn't, we said hi to people in line and people sitting next to us, but I think actually he might have been playing against another kid at the table. It was like really the first time, though, that we ever were doing Pokemon in public. And I mean, this place was packed. There were kids everywhere. There were older teens, younger teens. There were adults mostly standing around the sides of this big area in the mall watching their kids play. But there were a few other adults at the tables like me. And this one guy comes over with this big long box of Pokemon cards. And it's like, hey, you guys got anything good to trade? Can I look through your collection? And at that point, we had our set in our binder that we weren't going to trade, like our singles. We were not going to trade that no matter what. But we had our doubles in these boxes. And there were these things at the time. There were versions of the cards which were plain cardstock. And then there were versions of these characters, Pokemon, which were holographic foil cards. They were special cards. Didn't give you any special bonuses when playing the game, but they were, cool to collect. And so we had some holographic doubles in our set, etc. This guy comes over with a backpack full of binders and multiple boxes of cards, like thousands of cards probably. He's like, hey, can I look through your stuff? You want to trade? And we're very hesitant because we're like, trade with a stranger? Like, what is this? We're going to get ripped off? Like, we weren't sure. So he looks through and he pulls out maybe a dozen, maybe 24 cards between myself and my son. And he's like, I'd really, like to get these cards. What could I offer you? And at that point, we had pretty much the whole set, probably had the whole set. We had no idea about making decks. Like, we really didn't know what we wanted. So like, we spent a couple minutes kind of looking at his stuff, and it was impressive, but we're like, I don't know. I don't really know if we want to trade. Like, we have everything we want. We're just kind of here for the Mew and hanging out. He's like, here, I'll give you this whole box of Pokemon cards for these 12 or 24 cards. And like, Dave and I look at each other and we're like, Sure. So obviously the value of these Pokemon cards was going up as far as like comic book stores reselling them, people selling them on eBay. We had no idea. So he probably walked away with more value in the few cards we gave him than in the box of cards that he gave us, which were probably like what they call commons, or maybe, there probably weren't any rares in there, or if there were rares, they were ones that he had lots of copies of. But we were just so enthralled with the volume of cards we were given. Suddenly, although our collections were pretty much complete, we were now able to make tons and tons of different decks, and, just the options for playing the game were that much bigger. And because this place was a Pokemon League event, we were educated in the fact that there were other smaller stores around the area that had weekly Pokemon leagues where kids would come and play against each other. They would get little stamps in a book, and at the end of a certain month, based on how many stamps you got special promotional shiny cards from that place. So this really kicked our sort of social Pokemoning off. Very shortly after that distribution, places, I remember in particular, we had another way to collect Pokemon in the real world. That was from Burger King. They had these plastic Pokeballs, and inside each was a gold foil card, which was thicker. You couldn't play with it, but it was basically a trading card, like a gold statue of a trading card. And so we got that whole collection, which we have to today. And we started looking up the local leagues that I could drive David to on Saturdays. And we found a place literally right around the block from us called Zany Brainy, which was kind of an educational store. And he signed up for the league, but I wasn't able to play because it was for kids like 13 and younger or something like that. So I would show up, drive him there, show up. I'd just kind of sit off to the side for an hour and watch him play against all the other kids and get his stamps. And it was cool, but, I was kind of itching to play myself. Just so happened that I think it was the next week, I had to go out of town for work. This is the first time of ever traveling for my job. I was going to San Diego, California, and I was going there to go to a convention for some software that I was using at my work. And I stayed at a hotel which was attached to a mall. And the first day I got there, I think it was a Sunday, and the convention started Monday or something like that. And so I decided I'm going to go walk around the mall and just see, what's there. And of course I came upon a gaming store, and I can't remember the name of it. But I know that the mall was in Horton Center, I believe it was called, in San Diego. And I saw a whole bunch of kids and a couple of their parents sitting together playing Pokemon cards. And so I walked over and I was like, oh, hey, that was cool. My son and I play this at home. And I kind of downplayed how much I knew about the game at that point. And so the gym leader, which is basically like a volunteer, not an employee of the store, but somebody who uses that venue to host the weekly Pokemon League, and then therefore the venue gets more traffic, was like, yeah, hey, come in and play, and this is what we do, da-da-da. So I bought some cards there, enough to play. Prepackaged deck, if I remember correctly. And I started playing, and they like randomly paired us up. So like, I had to play against a kid, and then I had to play against a parent and whatever. At the end, I was like, oh, this is cool because, back where I live in Chicago, they don't let the adults play. It's just the kids. But I'd love to be like a gym leader, and run these kind of events. And the person who was working there or volunteering there was like, yeah, well, here's this booklet. Take this test. And depending on if you do good enough on the test, you can qualify to be a gym leader. And so I took this test. It was, I don't actually remember, but I feel like it was like a dozen questions about Pokemon. I got them all right on my first try. And it was like about the rules of the game. It was about the characters themselves and about sort of the spirit of competition, fair play and stuff. And so they scored it, and they're like, wow, you aced it. You really know what you're doing. Here's your pin. Here's like your special stuff, and we'll submit your name to the Pokemon Company, and now you're a gym leader. It's like, whoa. So I come home from this business trip, and I'm like, hey, I got some new cards, and, David's happy to see me. I'm like, oh, by the way, I took the gym leader test, and I'm officially a gym leader now. And so that was my first sort of like, reward, like, first time that my son was like, wow, like you're doing something cool that I can't do as a kid, and when I've been doing all the cool stuff that you can't do as an adult. So anyway, we kept going to this place called Zany Brainy, and every week he would play and the adults would stand around and watch. And I tried talking to them about becoming a gym leader there, but they didn't want to they already had gym leaders, so they didn't want to rock the boat by having more people come on board. So I was like, oh, that's fine. So I started looking for other places I could be a gym leader. Anyway, so David's playing at Zany Brainy, and I'm standing around, and when you see the same parents week after week, and you're standing around waiting for your kids to do their thing, you start talking with the other parents. And there's this guy there named Bill, and he's like, yeah, my daughter loves it so much, and we drive 20 minutes from where we live to this one place just so we can play together. And he invites us. He's like, hey, you guys should come hang out at our house sometime. So, next week or two, we go over to their house, and, the kids are playing, and he's like, here, come take a look at my office. His office is decked from wall to wall with Pokemon stuff. Plushies, a lot of stuff from Japan. Plushies, tons of cards, action figure type statuettes, all kinds of stuff. I'm like, whoa, you guys are really into this. He's like, yeah, my daughter was into the game, and he, by the way, was big into Magic the Gathering and Dragon Ball Z. So he had all this anime stuff, and he had all this Magic the Gathering stuff as well. And he's like, yeah, I have this fan site on the internet that I made for my daughter just, for fun. And it started getting popular. It got more and more popular. And suddenly this magazine company, which is not around anymore, 20 years later, offered to buy his website and make him the full-time employee. So his full-time job was running a Pokemon fan website, and it was called Pojo.com, which is like Pokemon Dojo, slammed together. So Pojo.com, and he would get all this Pokemon stuff as promotional material for running the website and putting ads on the site for comic book shops and Pokemon stuff and related stuff. And he's like, well, why don't you, do you want to help me out with the website? Because he knew I was into software development at the time. And I'm like, sure, what do you want me to do? Well, I want to put a Pokedex out there. Now, a Pokedex is basically like a index or an encyclopedia of all the individual Pokemon. So I created a database, and I created some HTML that could be generated from this database with some code, which basically every page or every Pokemon had their own separate web page with the picture and all the stats and their appearances. And then I started literally getting paid. I became a consultant to his media company to maintain their Pokedex online. And then, I noticed that people were submitting articles about tournaments and about playing cards in their local area. So I'm like, well, I can write one of those every week for the different comic shops that David and I started going to and playing tournaments of cards against each other. So I started writing articles. And then they announced that I think Pokemon Gold and Silver were out in Japan, but they weren't out in America yet. And I was able to get an emulator and check out the games on my computer, not being able to read anything, but I was able to play the games, and knowing the characters, I was able to figure out kind of, what was going on and take screenshots. And I wrote, he and I came up with a thing where I would start writing a walkthrough and writing articles about my impressions of Pokemon Gold and Silver before it came out in the US. And so before any of these kids had actually played Pokemon on their Game Boys, they were able to see my colored screenshots of it and read about the adventure and the storyline based on the Japanese version. It was a wildly popular article on the site, and the magazine company offered to buy my story and then publish it in their magazine. So now suddenly I'm publishing articles in magazines, and I published like different games, like crossword puzzles, different arts and crafts, different magic tricks that you could do with Pokemon cards. I started writing a bunch of articles for the website and for this magazine. It was really cool. It was like, I'm actually making money from my hobby that I'm dumping lots of money into. So I mentioned that David and I every week would go to different comic book shops. Typically what would happen there, you'd have a tournament where you would pay, I want to say it was like $10. I don't remember, to be honest. And you'd get like 3 packs of cards, or 10 pack, maybe it was $20, and you'd get like 10 packs of cards, and you'd have to make a deck out of those cards that you got, whatever randomly you got. And then you'd play against each other, or you could bring your own decks and play. There were different styles, and then you would win booster packs. And these comic book shops would host these tournaments in the back room with like a card table and chairs. And, the kids would hang out there all day. It's a nice, safe environment. You're playing something, you're socializing, but you're also spending money on, the comic book shop too. So it was just like this, perfect storm of things going on. I remember the first movie came out in November of '99, and we were so into it because there were, I think, 4 trading cards that you could only get by buying tickets for the movie. So we went and saw the movie, and I think we bought 4 tickets, so we got one of each card. We went and saw the movie, only 2 of us, so we had, 2 tickets, 2 empty seats that we didn't fill, but we had the cards. The cards were so important. And then we went back in line and we bought 4 more tickets to the movie, which we didn't actually go and see, but now we had 2 sets of 4. So David and I both each had one of each promotional card. As we're walking out of the movie, we happened to see our dentist and his 2 kids, and we're like, hey, here, free tickets to the movie. They don't come with the cards. We're keeping the cards, and they didn't care about the cards. They were thrilled to get free tickets to a movie. So it was another cool thing. I remember in 2000, in April of 2000, watching the Sopranos TV show, and Pokemon was so big at this point, it was in the news, it was all over the place, and it was even part of the storyline of one of the Sopranos episodes. Talk about enormous, like, Pokemon was invading everywhere. That fall, David and I went to our first ever Gen Con convention in Indianapolis because we wanted to be part of the World Championships and many other booster drafts. And that venue actually opened our eyes up to many other card games and painting D&D miniatures. We used to play D&D with just pure unpainted miniatures, and this got us into playing miniatures, which then got us into collectible miniature games big time, like Battletech, MechWarrior, Mage Knight, Hero Quest, HeroClix. All these things that we suddenly amassed all stemmed out of Pokemon. Those are all stories for another time, but by fall 2001, so we started in fall 98, and by 2001, David was, now like 14, going into high school soon, and he was taking a break from Pokemon. So it slowly wound down for me. I started a new job actually in September of 2000, where I started traveling every week, and Pokemon started to fade out of our lives. MMOs came in, massively multiplayer online games like World of Warcraft. At that time, it was Asheron's Call, EverQuest, and Dark Age Camelot, and then World of Warcraft. And those things came in, high school came in, work came in, and Pokemon kind of slipped to the sidelines. I still kept up with the news and knowledge of, when new generations and when games came out, but we didn't pick them up, and we didn't really do Pokemon for a while. So we actually missed primarily missed the Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, which I think was the third generation of Pokemon. 8 years later, summer 2009, my younger son was now turning 7. And he and I were into, different stuff together. He had his generation's things that he used to play with, and I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I remember at one point saying, like, hey, have you ever heard of Pokemon? And he's like, yeah, I think some kids have the trading card games. He didn't really know that much about it. And I was like, well, hey, let's pull out some of our old Pokemon stuff, take a look at it. And he was pretty interested. And so that fall, we decided to buy 2 Nintendo DSi's and 2 copies of Pokemon Platinum. And he and I both started playing Pokemon Platinum together. That was, I think, the last game that had just come out, or not just come out, but had been out for a little while. And I fell right back into it. I was so thrilled. I was having such a good time with it. And trying to collect these generations of Pokemon. They were probably up to like 400 and something Pokemon at this point, because every generation would add another 50 to 100 or 150. I can't remember exactly how many there were now. But yeah, so 2009, Matt's 7, and he was also learning to read at the time. Now, for some reason, I might have the math a bit wrong here. Because I feel like he learned to read earlier than that. But in any case, whatever year it was that we started playing Pokemon Platinum, his reading took off like wildfire because he wanted to be able to read what the characters in the game were playing or were saying to him and follow the storyline. So I really, really credit Nintendo with making Matt enthusiastic about reading. I mean, up till now, he'd been reading, he had been reading books and like picture books and young kids books, and I read a lot to him. But this was when he really learned how to read sophisticated things and follow long, complicated storylines. And I mean, like, I remember coming home from work after a couple of days of being out on the road, and like it was like when I left, he wasn't like that into it, and when I came back, he was like a master. Like, he could read everything. I mean, he was just like wildfire. So he and I had a lot of fun with that, and thus began sort of my second generation of being into Pokemon. We had a lot of fun with that game in particular, creating these underground bases and connecting to each other wirelessly instead of with these link cables, and raiding each other's bases and stealing flags and decorating them with Pokemon dolls. We started amassing his collection of Pokemon trading cards, which, by the way, at some point between 2001 and 2009, I had sold all of my Pokemon cards on eBay for quite a good amount of money. But I didn't think I was ever coming back to that in my life. And so we were starting from scratch with Pokemon cards. Now, David kept a lot, his Beanie Babies, kept his Pokemon gold cards from Burger King, kept some of his like figures, still has all of his badges, but we did get rid of our cards. And so late 2009, we started recollecting some of that stuff. And Matt was into it for a time, but not nearly as much as David and I were. We didn't go to card shops and look for tournaments anymore. I pretty much limited my external Pokemon action to trading Pokemon via the internet in the DSi games. And then, like, we went back and bought a Wii, and we went back and bought a GameCube off of eBay so that we could play some of the older games, Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Ranch. Mainly driven because there were certain legendaries that I think you could get through those games and then trade them up through the ages of Pokemon games and then finally get them traded into your DSi, because I wanted to collect them all. And at some point in 2009 or 2010, the first new Pokemon games that Matt and I bought was Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and Pokemon Rumble. And both of those we really loved. In fact, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, I think Matt might have liked it better than the basic games. I'm not sure. But what I liked about the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games was that you didn't start with the basic starter Pokemon. In fact, in his game, he started with the Shinx, which is kind of this electric cat sort of looking Pokemon. And Shinx was a newer Pokemon to me. I wasn't as familiar with it because it was from one of the later generations. But Matt really liked it. It was his favorite Pokemon. And like 2 days after he started playing that game, we went to this amusement park near our house called Great America. And it was like the first time we went there that summer. I think it was early in the summer, and they had these booths where like they had, carnival games where you could throw balls and knock down cans off of a thing, or throw darts at balloons, whatever. And for $2, I remember walking up and playing a game and winning, and the reward was a large stuffed animal, and the selection of stuffed animals included Pokemon, and one of those Pokemon was a Shinx. So he just starts playing this game. He really likes his starter Pokemon, which is a Shinx, and he was really into the Shinx, and boom, we just happened to see a large stuffed Shinx, and I happened to win it like 2 days later. I mean, it was like this perfect confluence of events. Boom, Matt's hooked into Pokemon even more. So we we carried this huge stuffed animal around the park, and we were actually staying in a hotel nearby, making kind of a weekend out of it. And so like we would do rides and stuff, and then we'd go back in the evening to the hotel, and we'd sit up in the club lounge and play Pokemon trading cards, which we bought from the local Walmart. And we would, I don't think we had our DSi. Yeah, no, we probably had our DSi's. So then after we're done playing cards in the lounge, we'd go back to the room, or we'd go to the pool, then we'd go back to the room, and we'd each play on our DSi Pokemon. So like, it really, again, for the second time, Pokemon has become like a big part of, my connection to my kids. And, for that alone, I will always be grateful to the franchise. But it also allowed me to unleash a lot of my creativity in multiple ways, to, actually have a hobby that pays me back for all the money I invest in it. And it's just damn fun. So, by the time February of 2010 came around, the next generation of Pokemon came out, Black and White, which was super exciting for us. We had a great time playing that game. And, I would say after Black and White, before X and Y came out in the next generation, Matt started to lose his interest in it. So now I've kind of entered into my third phase of Pokemon, where I'm playing it, hard and strong. I don't have any kids that are preteens playing it anymore. They both still enjoy it. They both still play Pokemon stuff here and there, and we play together. But right now, I have actually, shared my Pokemon experience with my Minecraft and internet friends through Twitter and through videos and things like that. So, I'm not going to go into my recent history of Pokemon, but I wanted to give you guys kind of that look at, this, what Pokemon has meant to me from 98 through 2016, and having a lot of fun, and I look forward to many more years of catching them all. Hope you guys enjoyed that Let's Talk. See you next time. 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 See you next time.